I still remember the day the thought first crossed my mind, the day I realized that money had built a wall between me and the people I loved. Not a wall made of stone or pride, but of comfort, of convenience, of expectations. For years, I had given my family everything they asked for: new cars, lavish vacations, and a life free from struggle. But the more I gave, the less I recognized them. Gratitude was replaced by entitlement, love by habit. And somewhere in that quiet shift, I began to wonder, if I lost everything tomorrow, would anyone still stand beside me? That question haunted me. It wasn't born out of suspicion or paranoia, but loneliness, the kind that comes when you're surrounded by people yet feel utterly unseen. I was 63, a retired architect with a modest empire built through sleepless nights and missed birthdays. My wife, Anita, had grown accustomed to luxury. My 2 children, Rohan and Mira, both in their 30s, saw me less as a father and more as a financial safety net. When they spoke to me, it was rarely to ask how I was doing. It was to ask for something. I didn't blame them entirely. I had made it too easy. I'd hidden the cost of my sacrifices so well that they thought money grew on trees, or perhaps, in their eyes, on me. But one night, sitting alone in my grand living room with the lights dimmed, I overheard a conversation that would change everything. They didn't know I was standing outside the study door. Rohan's voice was sharp, almost impatient. "Dad doesn't understand how things work anymore. He's stuck in his old school ways. I swear, if he doesn't help me with this new business loan, I'll just sell my share of the house." Mira laughed softly. "Oh, please. He always gives in. He can't say no. He's too sentimental. Just give it a few days, cry a little, and he'll cave." Their words didn't just sting. They shattered something inside me. Not because they were asking for money, but because of how casually they had measured my worth in rupees and sentiment. That night, I made a decision. I would find out who they truly were, not as my children, but as people. I would disappear, not physically, but financially. I would strip away everything that made me useful to them and see what remained. The plan was simple, or so I thought. I would pretend to lose everything. I called my lawyer, an old friend, and asked him to temporarily transfer the assets and properties to a trust that no one could access without my consent. I told Anita that I had made some poor investments that went wrong, that I might have to sell the house and move into a smaller place for a while. Her reaction was immediate. "What do you mean, poor investments? You're telling me we might lose this house? After all these years?" Her voice trembled, not with fear, but anger. "Anita," I said softly, "it's temporary. We'll manage. I just need time to sort things out." But she didn't hear the reassurance, only the threat to her comfort. "Manage? How? I've spent my whole life keeping this family together, and now you want me to live like some common woman struggling for rent?" It was the first of many conversations that revealed more truth than I was prepared for. Over the next few days, word spread quickly within the family. Rohan called me, pretending to sound concerned. "Dad, you should have told me earlier. Don't worry, I'll help out, but, I might need you to sign something for my business expansion first. It'll help both of us." Mira was more blunt. "Dad, honestly, you should have planned better. You always said money wasn't everything, but now look where that's got us." No one asked how I was coping. Not one person offered emotional support, only transactional pity. A week later, Anita packed her bags. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a while. I can't handle this uncertainty." She didn't look me in the eye when she said it. The silence that followed her departure was the heaviest I'd ever known. The grand house, once full of noise and chatter, now felt like a museum of broken illusions. Every corner whispered a truth I'd ignored for years, that money can buy company, but not companionship. So I decided to go through with the next part of my plan. I sold my car, withdrew a small sum in cash, and moved into a small rented room on the outskirts of the city. No one knew where I was. I wore simple clothes, walked to the market, and lived like any ordinary retiree trying to make ends meet. At first, it was strange, liberating even. No phone calls, no demands, no pretense, just quiet mornings with tea and the newspaper. People around me didn't care who I was or what I'd achieved. To them, I was just Mr. Sharma, the old man who always smiled and fed the stray dogs near the tea stall. And for the first time in decades, I felt seen. Not for my status, but for my humanity. One morning, As I sat on a bench outside the market, a little boy approached me. "Uncle, can you help me tie my shoelace?" he asked, holding up a frayed sneaker. I smiled and bent down to help him. His mother, a fruit vendor nearby, called out, "Arjun, don't trouble the uncle." "No trouble at all," I said, smiling. She walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're new here, aren't you? Haven't seen you before." "I moved recently," I replied, trying to start over. She laughed, a kind, warm sound. "At your age? That's brave. Most people your age are done with life." I smiled faintly. "Sometimes life starts only when everything else ends." Her name was Lakshmi. Over the next few weeks, we often talked. She sold fruits, took care of her son alone, and still managed to smile through her struggles. I admired her strength, the kind I'd never known in my own privileged world. She didn't know who I really was, and I didn't tell her. With her, I didn't have to be a provider or a success story. I could just be. But fate has a way of testing even the purest intentions. One afternoon, as I sat at the tea stall reading the newspaper, I saw something that made my hands tremble. A headline with my name on it. "Businessman Rajesh Sharma reported missing, family worried for his safety." I stared at it, heart pounding. My family, the same ones who hadn't cared to call me for weeks, had suddenly remembered me. Or maybe they just remembered what I was worth. The tea vendor, noticing my expression, chuckled. "You look like you know the guy." I smiled faintly. Something like that. That night, as I walked back to my small room, the words of the headline echoed in my mind. For years, I had been present, but unseen. Now, I was gone, and suddenly, they noticed. I lay awake thinking, would they still care if they found out I had nothing left? The next morning, I decided it was time to find out. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The narrow street outside my room was still cloaked in a sleepy gray mist, the kind that softens sound and memory alike. I sat by the window, sipping tea, listening to the distant hum of a city that didn't care who I used to be. I should have felt invisible, but instead, I felt alive, stripped of pretense, of expectations, of the weight of being someone. I was at last just a man with his thoughts. Still, the headline from the day before wouldn't leave my mind. "Businessman Rajesh Sharma reported missing." I'd engineered my own disappearance, but the irony of seeing my name in print hit harder than I expected. My old life was calling, not out of love, but because absence had created value. And yet, for the first time, I wasn't eager to answer. I decided to walk through the market to clear my mind. The air smelled of damp earth and ripe fruit, and the sound of Lakshmi's laughter cut through the noise. She waved when she saw me, her face lighting up in that effortless way that reminded me of sunlight breaking through clouds. "Good morning, Mr. Sharma. You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," I said, smiling. "Too many thoughts." "Ah," she teased. "The curse of people with kind hearts. They think too much." I chuckled. "Or maybe I just drank too much tea." She handed me an apple, polished until it gleamed. "Here, on the house. You look like you need sweetness today." I wanted to tell her the truth, that the sweetness she offered wasn't in the fruit, but in the way she saw people. She had no reason to be kind to me, yet she was. There was no calculation, no hidden motive, just compassion. Her son, Arjun, ran up and tugged at my sleeve. "Uncle, can you come to my school function tomorrow? Mama says I'll be doing a poem." I hesitated. "You want me to come?" "Of course. You're my friend." It had been years since anyone had said that to me without wanting something in return. I nodded. "I'll be there." The next day, I went to the small government school. The paint was peeling, and the benches were cracked, but the children's energy filled the place with life. When Arjun stepped onto the stage, his voice trembled, but his eyes searched for me. When he found me in the crowd, he smiled, a big, fearless smile that carried him through the rest of his poem. Afterward, Lakshmi came over, pride shining in her eyes. "He's been practicing for days. Said he wanted to make you proud." I didn't know what to say. That small boy, in his innocence, had given me something my own children hadn't in years, a reason to feel needed. Not for money or status, but simply because I cared. That evening, as I walked Lakshmi and Arjun home, she spoke quietly. "You remind him of his grandfather. He passed when Arjun was little. Since you came around, he smiles more." Her words touched something deep in me. For so long, I had believed my wealth was the only legacy I had to offer. But here, among strangers, I was discovering a different kind of richness, one measured in moments, not money. A few days later, my old life came knocking, literally. It was a Sunday afternoon when I heard a knock on the door of my tiny room. I opened it to find a man in a suit, sweating under the Sunday. I recognized him instantly. Rakesh, one of my old company employees. "Sir," he gasped, relief washing over his face. "We've been looking everywhere. Your family is worried sick." I studied his expression. "Is that so?" "Yes, sir. Your son has filed a police report. Your daughter even posted about you online, said you've been missing for 2 weeks." I smiled faintly. "Tell them I'm fine. Just needed time." Rakesh hesitated. "Sir, forgive me, but the company's in trouble. Without you, the clients are nervous. They're talking about withdrawing their contracts." So that was it. Concern, once again, tied to value. My disappearance wasn't personal. It was professional. "I'll think about it," I said. "But for now, please don't tell anyone where I am." He looked confused, but nodded reluctantly. "Of course, sir, but they'll keep looking." After he left, I sat for a long time, staring at the floor. The test was working, painfully but truthfully. Everyone cared now, but for the wrong reasons. My absence had become an inconvenience, not a heartbreak. That night, as I walked through the market, Lakshmi noticed the heaviness in my face. "Something happened?" she asked gently. "Just people remembering me for the wrong reasons," I said. She smiled softly. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Sometimes people need to lose you to realize what they had." Her words lingered in my mind long after I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to find a small note slipped under my door. It wasn't signed, but I recognized the handwriting immediately, Rohan's. It read, "Dad, please come home. We were wrong. Mom's been crying. I'll do anything to make it right." I stared at the note for a long time, torn between hope and doubt. Part of me wanted to believe it, that maybe this experiment had done what years of silence couldn't. But another part of me wondered whether it was just another performance, another ploy to restore normalcy. I folded the note carefully and placed it in my pocket. Later that evening, I went to the park near the market, a quiet place where old men played chess and children chased kites. I sat there, watching the world move on without knowing my story. Lakshmi found me there, holding 2 cups of tea. "You look like a man deciding between the past and the present," she said. I laughed softly. "You're very perceptive." She handed me a cup. "When I lost my husband, I thought my life was over. But then I realized life doesn't stop. It just waits for you to start again." I looked at her, her eyes full of resilience. And for the first time, I saw a life beyond the one I'd built, a life where peace didn't depend on possessions or approval. But before I could speak, my phone buzzed. It was a number I hadn't seen in weeks. Mira. I answered quietly. "Hello? Dad?" Her voice trembled. "Where are you? Please. We're so sorry. We didn't mean to hurt you." Something inside me cracked. Maybe she meant it this time. Or maybe guilt had finally outweighed pride. "Mira," I said softly, "I'm safe. That's all you need to know. Please come home. Mom's not well." I hesitated. "Tell me something honestly. If I had really lost everything, would you still want me back?" There was a long silence on the other end. Then a whisper. I don't know." I closed my eyes. "Then you have your answer." When I hung up, my hands were trembling, not with anger, but with acceptance. I had the truth I came for, and it hurt more than I expected. Lakshmi watched me quietly, then said, "Sometimes the truth doesn't heal. It just frees you." That night, I walked home under the dim streetlights, the city alive around me, but my heart strangely calm. For the first time, I wasn't running from anything, not from love, not from disappointment, not even from the loneliness that had once scared me. Because in losing everything, I had finally found myself. The next few days felt strangely peaceful. The chaos that used to fill my mind, meetings, deadlines, family demands, had been replaced by quiet routines. I'd wake early, buy bread from the corner stall, sit by the lake, and watch the reflection of the sunrise ripple across the water. No one knew who I was, and no one cared. That anonymity, once my greatest fear, had become my greatest freedom. But the calm didn't last long. On the fourth morning, as I was returning from the market, I saw a car parked near the alley where I lived. A black Mercedes. I didn't need to see the number plate to know it was mine, the same one my son used to borrow for important meetings. I froze. What was he doing here? Then the door opened, and out stepped Rohan. He looked older, thinner, as though the weight of guilt had finally found its way onto his shoulders. He scanned the street, holding a photo in his hand, a photo of me. "Excuse me," he asked a passerby. "Have you seen this man?" I ducked behind a stall, heart racing. I wasn't ready to face him. Not yet. But then Lakshmi's voice called out behind me. "Mr. Sharma, is that your son?" Rohan's head snapped toward her. Before I could stop her, she said cheerfully, "He lives here, down that lane." My heart sank. Rohan turned toward the alley and spotted me standing there. For a moment, time stopped. The man who once couldn't spare a minute for his father was now staring at him as if he'd seen a ghost. "Dad," he whispered, walking closer. I didn't move. "How did you find me?" "Someone from the company told me they'd seen you near this area," he said softly. "I had to come." "You didn't have to," I replied. "You chose to. After 20 days. He winced. "I know. I was wrong. We all were." I studied his face, the son who had once idolized me, then learned to tolerate me, and finally, to ignore me. Now, he looked lost. "Why are you really here, Rohan?" I asked quietly. "Because you miss me, or because the company's falling apart?" His eyes filled with tears. "It's both, Dad. When you disappeared, everything fell apart. The clients, the investors, and us. We didn't realize how much we needed you." "Needed," I repeated. "Not loved." He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. Lakshmi watched from a distance, sensing that this was not her place to interfere. "Dad," Rohan continued, his voice breaking. "Mom hasn't slept in days. Mira keeps saying it's her fault. Please, come home. We'll make things right." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years between us. "Do you even know what right means, son? You all left me alone in that house long before I ever walked out." He stepped closer. "I know. I was selfish. But please, don't punish Mom for my mistakes." "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I just wanted to see who would still care if I had nothing." He shook his head, tears glistening. "Dad, please, let us fix this. I'll come every day. I'll listen this time. I promise." I wanted to believe him. God, I did. But the sincerity in his voice fought against the memory of all the times he'd walked past me, with barely a glance. "Go home, Rohan," I said softly. "You have your family. I have my peace." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my tone stopped him. He nodded slowly, wiped his eyes, and turned back toward the car. As the engine started and faded into the distance, Lakshmi walked up beside me. "You're a strong man," she said quietly. I shook my head. "No, I'm just a man who got tired of being invisible." That evening, as I sat outside the tea stall, a small crowd gathered nearby. Someone had brought a radio, playing an old song about homecoming, about forgiveness and regret. The lyrics pierced through the noise, echoing the ache in my chest. Later, I returned to my room and opened the old wooden box I kept under the bed. Inside was a collection of letters, drafts, really, that I had written but never sent. Letters to my children, my wife, even to myself. I picked up the first one, dated 2 years ago. "Dear Rohan, I know you're busy, but I miss the days when we talked about more than money. I wish you'd visit, not just for business, but for me." The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. I'd been reaching out long before this test. I'd just stopped expecting an answer. Then, I heard a knock at the door again, softer this time. When I opened it, Lakshmi was standing there with a tiffin box. "You haven't eaten," she said simply. I smiled weakly. "You don't have to keep doing this, you know." "I know," she said, "but maybe I want to." We sat together, eating quietly. The food was simple, lentils, rice, and pickles, but it tasted like comfort. After a while, she said, "You know, I lost my father before I could ever apologize to him. Whatever your son did, don't let time steal your chance to forgive." Her words lingered like the aftertaste of spice. Sharp, true, impossible to ignore. That night, I couldn't sleep. The city outside buzzed faintly, but my mind was louder. I kept hearing her voice, her warning about time. By morning, I had made a decision. I packed a small bag and took the first train to my hometown. Not to go back to my old house, that chapter was closed, but to visit the temple where my wife and I used to go when we first married. It was a place of peace, and I needed that now more than ever. As the train rattled through the countryside, I looked out the window at the fields, stretching endlessly under the Sunday life, moved on, indifferent to my pain. But maybe that was the point. Maybe I wasn't supposed to fight to be remembered, but to find peace in being forgotten. When I reached the town, I walked straight to the temple. The priest recognized me instantly. "Mr. Sharma, after so long!" I smiled faintly. Yes, I needed to remember who I was. He nodded as if he understood. Sometimes, we must lose ourselves to find that. I lit a candle and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, my prayers weren't for others to change. They were for me to forgive. My family might never see me the way I wanted, but that no longer mattered. Love, I realized, didn't always need an audience. Torn him apart. His son visited often now, not out of guilt, but love. The anger that had once consumed both of them had melted away like snow on warm stone. They talked about ordinary things, weather, food, the laughter of children. But beneath those simple exchanges ran something deeper, unspoken, yet stronger than words. Forgiveness. True, complete forgiveness. One morning, the son arrived with his little girl. She ran into the cottage, her tiny hands clutching a wildflower she'd picked from the roadside. "Grandpa," she chirped, holding it out to him. He smiled, his eyes glistening with that familiar warmth that once defined his youth. He took the flower, his fingers brushing hers gently, and placed it on the table beside him. "Do you know something, little one?" he said softly. "This flower will fade soon. But when it does, it will make room for new ones to bloom. That's how life works. We bloom, we fade, and we make space for others to shine." The child nodded, not understanding, but smiling anyway. She didn't need to. Some truths don't need explanation. They simply live in the heart until time makes them clear. After they left that day, the man watched the horizon until the last glimmer of sunlight vanished. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, like a farewell written across the heavens. He thought about the years he had wasted chasing approval, wealth, and pride, things that never truly mattered. But strangely, he didn't feel regret anymore. He had come to realize that even mistakes have their purpose. Every wound had guided him, every failure had taught him, and every act of love, even the ones that went unnoticed, had shaped the person he became. That night, as he sat by the window, the wind whispered through the trees, and he could almost hear familiar voices, his wife's laughter, his mother's humming, the sound of his son as a child, calling out to him from the field. It wasn't haunting. It was comforting. It felt like home. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the rhythm of his own breath. Slow, steady, calm. A peace he'd never known before settled deep within him. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about what he'd lost, but what he'd found. A second chance. Not in time, but in understanding. Days later, when the son returned, the house was silent. The old man was sitting in his favorite chair, a soft smile frozen on his face. The teacup was empty, and beside it, the wildflower his granddaughter had given him lay dried but still beautiful. It was as if he had simply drifted into sleep, carried away on a sigh. The son stood there for a long time, the weight of the moment pressing into him. He didn't cry right away. Instead, he knelt beside his father, taking his frail hand into his own. "I'm sorry it took me so long," he whispered, "but thank you for waiting for me to come home." When the villagers heard the news, they came together in quiet mourning. The man who had once been left behind was now remembered by everyone. They spoke of his kindness, his humility, and how he had taught them that no act of compassion is ever too small to matter. The children he had once helped still carried stories of him in their hearts, and even those who had never met him felt as though they had. At his funeral, the entire community gathered. The sun filtered softly through the trees, casting dappled light across the crowd. The son stood before them, holding the same wildflower his daughter had given the old man. "My father taught me that love is not about what we say, but what we do when no one's watching," he began, his voice trembling. "He gave when he had nothing. He forgave when I gave him every reason not to, and he lived quietly, but fully, without bitterness, without hate. I used to think success was about being seen. He showed me that it's about being remembered for kindness. The people nodded, some wiping their eyes. The sound of a gentle breeze swept through, as if carrying the man's spirit across the field he used to walk. In the weeks that followed, the son found a box tucked away in the corner of his father's room. Inside were old letters, faded photographs, and a journal. He opened it carefully, turning the pages filled with his father's handwriting. The entries were simple but profound, reflections on life, on choices, on forgiveness. One line stood out above all. It's not the years that define a man, but what he does with the days he's given. The son closed the journal and pressed it to his chest, tears finally falling freely. That night, he told his daughter about her grandfather, not as the man he'd once been angry with, but as the man who had taught him what love truly meant. They lit a candle by the window, the way his father used to, and for a moment, the house glowed with quiet warmth. As time passed, the son carried on his father's work. He helped those in need, not for recognition, but because it was right. He never forgot the lessons that had taken him a lifetime to learn. Every now and then, he would visit the park bench where his father once sat feeding the birds, and he'd sit there too, listening, remembering, smiling. One afternoon, his daughter joined him. "Dad," she asked, "do you think Grandpa can see us from heaven?" He looked up at the sky, where the sun filtered through clouds like soft gold. "I don't just think he sees us," he said gently. "I think he's here, in everything good we do." The little girl smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. The birds fluttered around them, their wings catching the light. And in that quiet moment, there was no sorrow, only peace. The old man's story became a lesson passed down through generations, a tale of loss, forgiveness, and the power of love that refuses to fade. Though he had lived simply and died quietly, his life became something eternal, a whisper of hope for anyone who had ever been forgotten. A reminder that it's never too late to make things right, and that even the smallest light can shine forever in the hearts it touches. And somewhere, perhaps beyond the veil of time, the old man smiled once more, knowing he had finally come home.